The year is 1338. The air in the valley is thin and clean, smelling of grass and snowmelt from the Tian Shan Mountains. Below, the great Lake Issyk-Kul in what is now Kyrgyzstan glitters under the Central Asian sun. A trading community of Nestorian Christians lives here along the Silk Road, their lives governed by the seasons and the caravans that pass through. They are merchants, families, faithful people living at a crossroads of the world. They have no idea they are also living at a crossroads of history. That year and the next, something rips through their community. It is sudden. It is lethal. It has no name they recognize, so on the tombstones for their dead, they carve the only word that fits: pestilence. For nearly 700 years, those tombstones sat in the quiet valley. They were a local tragedy, a footnote in a long-lost chronicle. No one knew they were not a footnote. They were the headline. They were the single most important clue to solving the greatest murder mystery in human history. The question that has haunted us for centuries: where, precisely, did the Black Death begin? When the Great Pestilence finally reached Europe in 1346, it arrived as a ghost. It came on ships, carried by rats, transmitted by the fleas they carried. It moved through the ports of the Mediterranean and exploded across the continent with a speed and ferocity that felt supernatural. Within 5 years, it killed as many as 200 million people, possibly half the population of Europe gone. It rewrote economics, religion, politics, even our DNA. It was the single greatest mortality event in recorded history, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. And for all that time, for all the scholarship and study, the origin point remained a frustrating blank on the map. Historians knew it came from the East, an abstract, terrifyingly vague direction. The pandemic seemed to rise out of the heart of Asia like a storm, with no discernible epicenter. It left a cold trail, a path of death leading back towards the heart of the continent. But where was the source? Where was the moment that this particular strain of Yersinia pestis first made the catastrophic leap into the human population and began its world-altering rampage? For 7 centuries, we had theories, but we had no proof. For a long time, the leading suspect was China. It made a certain kind of sense. 14th century accounts mentioned widespread disease in that region. The vast Mongol Empire connected east and west like never before, creating highways for microbes as well as merchants. The theory was that the plague began there, then slowly smoldered its way west along the Silk Road, arriving in Europe years later. This was the best available interpretation of the evidence at the time. It was a logical inference based on trade routes and fragmented historical texts, but it was never more than a theory. A good one, but a theory nonetheless. It had problems. The timeline was fuzzy. The genetic evidence from later plague victims in Europe didn't point cleanly to a specific Chinese source. Every time scientists tried to trace the family tree of the plague bacterium backward, the trail went cold somewhere in Central Asia. The China theory wasn't wrong because it was foolish. It was wrong because it was incomplete. The real answer, when it came, wasn't found by looking at the grand sweep of empires and trade routes. It was found by zooming in, with microscopic precision, on a handful of long-dead individuals buried in a forgotten cemetery. What the old theories was still missing was physical, undeniable proof. Ground zero. The discovery that changed everything. The first piece of the puzzle came not from a geneticist, but from a historian. Professor Philip Slavin at the University of Stirling was doing what historians do. He was reading. He was sifting through archives, re-examining old evidence. He came across records of a Russian excavation from the 1880s, detailing 2 small Christian cemeteries near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan. Slavin noticed something extraordinary. In the grave inscriptions, there was a massive spike in deaths for the years 1338 and 1339, far more than any other period, and 10 of those tombstones gave a specific cause of death. They used that one chilling word: pestilence. This was a decade before the plague even arrived in Europe. Slavin had a hypothesis. This wasn't just a local outbreak. This was a flare. This could be the origin point everyone had been looking for. But a hypothesis, like the China theory, is not proof. He needed evidence from the bodies themselves. He reached out to a team that specialized in finding the ghosts of ancient diseases, the ancient DNA experts at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, led by Johannes Krause. They managed to track down the remains of 7 of the people buried in those cemeteries. The question was simple, but the task was monumental. After almost 700 years, could any trace of the killer's DNA still be found inside the victims? The team focused on the teeth. A tooth is a natural time capsule. The hard enamel protects the soft pulp inside, a chamber rich in blood vessels where the DNA of any infection coursing through a person's body might be trapped and preserved. Carefully, they drilled into the teeth of the 7 individuals. They extracted the fragmented genetic material within. Then they began to sequence it, piecing together a blizzard of tiny DNA fragments, looking for one specific signature, the genetic code of Yersinia pestis. They found it. In 3 of the 7 individuals who died in 1338, they found the undeniable genetic fingerprint of the plague. It was the smoking gun. Philip Slavin's historical hunch was correct. Pestilence in that valley meant the plague. But this discovery led to a much bigger one. When the team, led by researcher Maria Spyrou, reconstructed the full genome of the bacterium from that Kyrgyz valley, they realized what they had. It was not just a strain of the Black Death. It was the strain. Think of plague strains like a family tree. The strains found in victims from all across Europe, from Italy to England, were like branches. What the team found in the Issyk-Kul victims was the trunk. It was the direct ancestor. The genome from 1338 sat at the very base of the tree, the exact point before the plague diversified into the variants that ravaged the world. And that revealed the most startling part of the story. The origin wasn't just a place. It was an event. Existing plague strains found across Europe and Asia were all descended from this single ancestral strain. This suggested that the jump to humans wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. A big bang of plague diversification happened right there in that region in the years just before 1338. This one event seeded the pandemic. For centuries, we pictured the Black Death as a wave gaining momentum as it slowly rolled west from a distant, unknown origin. The new evidence rewrites that story completely. It was not a wave. It was a single, explosive event. In the highlands of Central Asia, a local strain of Yersinia pestis, likely circulating in the native marmot population, acquired the traits that allowed it to become a mass killer. It jumped to the local human population, causing the deaths recorded on those tombstones in 1338. From that single point, this newly supercharged bacterium entered the vast network of the Silk Road. It didn't need to slowly evolve as it traveled. The weapon was already perfected. It radiated out from that epicenter, carried in multiple directions by travelers, merchants, and soldiers. The strains found in Europe just a few years later were the immediate descendants of the strain found in that valley. This means the Black Death spread far faster than anyone imagined. The fuse wasn't lit in China decades earlier. The bomb was built and detonated in the Tian Shan Mountains, and the world felt the blast almost immediately. We are no longer looking at a vague geographical area, but a specific biological event in a specific place at a specific time. The reframe. We can now return to that valley by Lake Issyk-Kul. It is no longer a historical footnote. It is the cradle of the world's deadliest pandemic. The men and women buried under those stones are not just victims of a local tragedy. They may very well be among the first victims, patient zeros of the Black Death. Their story shows that history is not always a slow, flowing river. Sometimes, it is a single spark in a quiet valley that sets the world on fire. For 700 years, the mystery was where. We now have that answer with a precision that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. But every great answer in science creates a new, more refined question. We now know where and when. What we still don't fully understand is why. Why there? Why then? Researchers are now investigating climate data from that period, looking for environmental triggers that might have stressed the local animal populations, forcing the plague-carrying marmots into closer contact with humans. The search for the environmental trigger is the next chapter in this 700-year-old story. We finally know where the Black Death began. Now, the work begins to understand why it started at all.